Hello and welcome to Open Line, live on Home TV. I'm Mark Bayshore. Thanks very much for joining us. Our topic this evening regards marijuana in Michigan, including the licensing and regulation of medical marijuana, as well as the possible marijuana legalization proposal on the November ballot. It appears likely. Most of the last decade has been extremely confusing as far as marijuana policy in Michigan goes. Back in 2008, voters approved medical marijuana, but years later, the legal landscape is still confusing. How do businesses operate within the confines of the law? How do patients safely get cannabis? And who grows it? And who tests it? Over the next 60 minutes or so, we'll explore the legalization debate, the administrative challenges of medical marijuana, and the arguments favoring and opposing the legalization of recreational pot. We'll also get into the very interesting politics of the moment regarding how legalization might unfold. Indeed, some jurisdictions have legalized recreational marijuana around Michigan already. Now, during our 1-hour live program here on May 31st, we encourage you, the viewer, to join in on the conversation and ask our expert panel questions. The number to call is 517-349-1232. That's 517-349-1232. Or use Facebook or Twitter using our handle at Home TV. Want to take a minute to introduce our guest this evening. First, Jeffrey Hank is chair of the Board of Directors and Executive Director for MILegalize. His group favors legalization of recreational marijuana. David Harns is Public Information Officer for the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, commonly known as LARA. And Matthew Yalscot is Grassroots Director for Healthy and Productive Michigan. His organization opposes legalization. Thanks very much to all of you for being here this evening. Before we get started in earnest, I'd like to give each of you a chance just to tell our viewers and listeners a little bit more about who you are and what you do. Jeff, we'll start with you.
Jeffrey Hank from Holt, Michigan, live in East Lansing, Michigan currently, so this is live at my house right now. I'm an attorney and the executive director and chair of the board of MILegalize. We've been working for the last 3 years to create the best legalization law in the United States for Michigan so we can lead in creating jobs, ending the civil rights tragedy that we believe is 20,000 plus arrests of adults every year in Michigan for simple use or possession of marijuana. Michigan citizens don't deserve to be second-class citizens. We know these laws harm people, they harm families, they do more negative than good. So we've been working very hard to create a very well thought out proposal modeled on Michigan's current medical marijuana laws, which has the most modern, up-to-date standards and practices to govern the testing of marijuana, the sale of marijuana, protecting the kids, dealing with people driving under the influence. And we believe voters are ready to pass it. And it would be great if the legislature would also adopt it, but as we'll probably talk about tonight, we don't want them to adopt that and make it worse. We spent a lot of time making this a very good law, and we believe people will vote on it in November, if not, and enact it.
Thanks, Jeff. Let's go to David Harns. David's Public Information Officer again with LARA. David?
Sure. So I work with the Bureau of Medical Marijuana Regulation, and we are a division of LARA, right? And we've been tasked with implementing the state law, the MMFLA, which was passed in 2016. So this bureau is just over a year old, and we've already put in place the entire regulatory system, and we began accepting applications last December. Over 500 applications have come in already, and just this morning we put through another 12 pre-qualifications. The licensing board, I should say, did, and so we're well on our way moving forward in the new regulatory framework for medicinal marijuana.
Very good. Finally, Matthew Yalscot, tell us more about yourself.
I am the grassroots director of the ballot opposition campaign called Healthy and Productive Michigan. We're an independent ballot committee that started thinking about forming around the time that the Board of State Canvassers approved the petitions to start circulating. We really ramped things up in September of 2017, and in November we launched our committee. Formerly, I was a therapist and worked with patients with substance use disorders, and before that, I worked in substance abuse prevention as well.
Very good.
Very passionate issue for me.
Very
Thanks
good.
for having us.
We appreciate you all being here. Let's start with you, Jeff Hank. Let's assume for a moment that the legislature will not move to legalize here. Almost by the hour, it's looking less likely that that's that's going to happen. Take a minute or two and lay the case. You got into this earlier, but go into a little bit more depth and lay out the case for legalization.
Well, Michigan would be the 10th state in the United States to legalize marijuana. There are also territories like in Washington, D.C., Guam, Mariana Islands recently, Puerto Rico, which allow for medical marijuana, which is also, if you look at medical, it's allowed in over, I believe, 30 states at this point in time. So here in Michigan, we arrest 20,000 adults every year for simple use or possession of marijuana. This is something that over 90% of Michiganders don't believe someone should go in trouble for.
That's an astounding number.
Astounding number. The people don't think you should go to jail for using marijuana, and most people know, and the science bears out now, that marijuana is safer than things like alcohol, it's safer than tobacco, it's safer than other products that humans regularly consume. People don't die from marijuana from using marijuana. In fact, no one has ever died from marijuana. There's no recorded evidence. And we're starting to learn more and more about the medical benefits of marijuana. So people are looking at this and they see the civil rights issue of 20,000 adults being arrested every year for something that is safer than alcohol. We talk about, one of the taglines of our campaign is regulate marijuana like alcohol. It's not regulated the same because they're different things, but we can learn lessons from how alcohol and tobacco were regulated, and that's one of the things our proposal does. So it takes like the lessons learned in California, for example. When we crafted this proposal here, we looked at every single state and we said, how did you deal with issues like marketing to children? And we wanted to create the best standards, and we looked at all these other states where legalization has happened, and we've learned the lessons from that. So we've been able to take that, merge it with the MMFLA program, and we think that people in the state of Michigan who had an opportunity.
What is MMFLA?
MMFLA is the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act. So, I've been at this now for a few years, Mark. I think you've probably interviewed me a couple of times over the years. We've collected over 700,000 signatures from Michigan citizens in 2 different campaigns in the last 3 years to legalize marijuana in Michigan. I've talked to thousands of people on the street of all different stripes, and most people will tell you they know marijuana prohibition is failing. They don't agree with it. They think we need the jobs. They think we need the tax revenue. They don't like to see people arrested for it. So what we've done is create a very reasonable plan based on what people want. We legalize marijuana for adults over the age of 21. We allow for small-scale possession and personal cultivation at home, similar to how you can craft your own beer, you can make your own wine, but you can't sell it. If you want to sell it, you have to go get a license. If you go get a license, you're very thoroughly regulated, very thoroughly regulated. These people who get licenses, it's almost like you're going to apply for the CIA. You got to give 3 years of bank accounts. You've got to give people your tax records. They get to know everything about you. We live in a country where the president hasn't even had to give his tax records, but people who want a marijuana license have to go through extraordinary burdens to do so. So very heavily regulated. We test all marijuana, and then we take the tax revenue from it, and we put 35% into roads and bridges, 35% into schools. We give 15% back to local governments, local cities or townships which allow marijuana businesses in the jurisdiction, and another 15% to the counties which allow it. And then we also give, for the first 2 years, $20 million a year for medical marijuana research for veterans to study PTSD and veteran suicides and all these things that are real issues. We're losing far more veterans to suicide in this country than we're losing from people getting harmed by marijuana. So what we've done is put together this very, I believe, smart proposal, very responsible proposal, which is going to raise hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue every year for Michigan to put into things people want, public interest things people want, end those 20,000 plus arrests of adults every year, and get Michigan in sort of line what Ontario and California and Colorado and all these other places are doing. Have us be leaders, not behind the pack. We've known about this long enough now, Mark, where it's no longer time to wait. This isn't this complicated of an issue. So we haven't had the political leadership to do it. That's why I've had to do all these petitions. So you're right, the legislature probably won't adopt, but we're very confident. The polling shows if this goes to the voters, they're ready to adopt it.
I want to go back to that 20,000 figure because that took me by surprise. Are you talking nationally?
No, it's just in the state of Michigan.
This is just in Michigan.
Just in the state of Michigan. And this is for just simple use in possession. Okay, this isn't for drug dealing. This isn't for providing to kids. This isn't for driving under the influence of marijuana. Our law prohibits driving under the influence of marijuana. So this is just, an adult like yourself or like anybody else here on this panel deciding in privacy of your own home to consume marijuana, something that's safer than alcohol. So people are ready for that to change. It doesn't make sense that it's illegal to do that in Michigan, but you can fly out to Colorado or California for vacation and engage in the same behavior.
Matthew Yalscot, you're coming at this from the other side. You oppose legalization for recreational purposes.
Walk
us through
our
the case
committee
against,
is opposed to recreational marijuana. We don't take a stance on medical. I would like to first address other states that have legalized. Just because other states have done it doesn't mean that we need to do it too. We've learned lessons from Colorado. Colorado has had increased youth use Colorado has had increased traffic fatalities. Colorado has had increased impaired driving issues as well. And also, we'd be the first state in the Midwest to deal with and to start regulation or legalization of recreational marijuana. What would that turn us into? We'd be the drug dealer of the Midwest. The Colorado had 877% increase in parcels seized in the U.S. mail of marijuana. That's being distributed to other states. That would turn us into something similar as well. I'd project that we'd have just as high rates.
Jeff Hank, are you willing to concede some of those stats about Colorado?
Not at all. In fact, Colorado Department of Transportation statistics show no rise in fatalities or injuries due to marijuana. There's been no increase in teen usage. Those are scientific journals that can be cited and statistics can be found. I encourage people to do their own research. A lot of the talking points the opposition uses are not true, Mark. They don't have citations. They don't have statistics. They base this stuff typically off something called the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking Agency, and they're a report that kind of engages in almost reefer madness type talking points, and
it's done by the federal government, the DEA, with no extra
they
money.
interweave talking points that don't make sense. So we just heard drug dealing capital. What does that mean? Michigan already has a $2 billion marijuana market. So we can be serious about this, and we can regulate that and bring it into the light of day and control and prevent all these problems and treat it as a public health issue or a public safety issue. Or we can ignore it, because if we don't legalize marijuana, it doesn't go away. In fact, we're going to see more marijuana coming from Colorado and California and Ontario and all these places. And if we don't figure out a way to regulate it, what are we doing? We're doing a disservice to our citizens, and we're not being leaders. So this isn't about, hey, everybody else is jumping off the bridge. Other states did it. We shouldn't do it. No, this is about being responsible. This is about being leaders, and this is about addressing where there's an issue. And what we do have a crisis with is not marijuana. It's these opioids. And statistics and medical journals, including all the top scientific medical journals across in England and the United States, show where medical marijuana is available, there is less abuse of opioids, there's less opioid deaths, there's less opioid addiction, and there's actually savings to government programs, health programs like Medicare, because people are consuming less prescription drugs, which are also more harmful. We have over 40,000 drug abuse deaths from opioids and prescriptions and heroin in this country. We have 0 for marijuana. So we need to be smart about where we focus on this, and that's what this proposal is about.
Matthew, I'll give you one last chance to just follow up here, and we'll move on beyond Colorado.
All right. Well, I'd first like to say you touched on the opioid epidemic, and I'm going to share a personal story really quickly. In college, I had a friend who started smoking marijuana. Unfortunately, his use increased so much that he dropped out, and he wasn't able to complete his college experience. We did not continue our friendship when he dropped out. I was browsing Facebook last summer and saw an obituary, and in that obituary was this gentleman who passed away from a heroin overdose. So we're not in an opioid epidemic right now. We're in an addiction epidemic. And there are many paths to addiction, just like there are many paths to the recovery. But right now, we're being presented with something that says we either need to legalize or we need to incarcerate. And our committee believes that there's a better alternative to both.
The polling suggests that the public is behind this opportunity to legalize pretty significantly. About the same number as voted to approve medical marijuana not quite 10 years ago. Why do you think you're in the minority here?
So we just released another poll which showed 48% in favor, 42% against on our side, and 11% undecided. I think that we're in the minority. You look at the lobby dollars in Colorado, they were 44-1. So for every $1 we had, the pro side had $44. They're able to get all this misinformation, truly, let's call it what it is, out there. If I Google marijuana right now, I can see that it'll make me a better driver, it'll cure all cancer, it'll cure all epilepsy, and it'll get rid of all Colombian and Mexican drug cartel. What an amazing plant this must be. But the reality is all this misinformation is being poured out there because we're dealing with an addictive industry. We're looking at a 10% excise tax rate. We're looking at the highest possession limits in the nation. This is neither responsible nor safe for Michigan.
We've got a caller on the line here who's got a question. Ryan's on the line from Meridian Township. Hi, Ryan. Go right ahead.
Hey, my question was just to the gentleman from the anti-cannabis group, and I was wondering where he was getting his statistics from Colorado, because I've only heard those from the group that Mr. Hank mentioned, the Rocky Mountain High, and when I look it up from other sources like the state of Colorado, it's different. So I'm just curious where the source is coming from.
So it is Rocky Mountain High Report. That's a compilation of different reports that are done through the DEA, through their state police, and it's all compiled. So I could go in and look at a report in there that says one Colorado hospital experienced 50% of babies that were tested positive for marijuana. That's a real stat that's in there, but that comes out of St. Mary Corwin's Hospital, but it was compiled into the HIDA report. And again, I'd like to reiterate that that report doesn't have any extra funding. This is just something that's gathered by police and by the DEA.
Thank you for the call, Ryan. Our number is 517-349-1232.
Thanks, Ryan.
We'll come back to this and other relevant points here. I want to work Dave Harns into the conversation here, though, before much more time passes us by. So let's switch gears a little bit. David, again, a spokesman for LARA, the Michigan Licensing and Regulation Authority, which oversees this new and expanding industry in the state. Another piece of this puzzle involves authorizing and certifying. This is specifically one of your responsibilities, authorizing and certifying marijuana-related businesses in Michigan. It's no secret that it's been pretty slow going lately. You've come under some criticism for not getting more approvals out, not vetting some of these businesses faster. Just describe for us what's been happening recently, please.
Sure. So I mentioned earlier we started taking applications December 15th, and we had the applications started to trickle in, but then February 15th came, and that was the deadline for any of the facilities that are currently operating. They were operating in this gray area, and we were able to kind of give them a grandfather clause to kind of work their way into this licensed, framework here. And so February 15th was their deadline to apply at the state level or risk it being considered an impediment to licensure if they didn't. So we had almost 200 applicants on February 15th, and so we were kind of flooded all at once with a lot of different applications. And so, yes, it has been a little slow going. And the reason why that is because we are having to follow the statutory language, which requires us to really delve deep into these applicants and make sure that those who make it through the process and who are granted licenses meet all of the requirements of the law. They can't have any criminal, backgrounds that make them ineligible. They have to not have, done different things and that would make them ineligible with their taxes and with other things like that. So,
but was the response also greater than you expected?
The response was right about what we expected. What we didn't expect was the fact that it would take so long for licensees to get back to us with our questions for them. So licensees need to turn in an application, and then we send out deficiency letters which show what we're missing, what are we looking for. We have questions that we know that the board is going to want answered, and so there's communication back and forth, and so that often takes several months, and so it's been a longer process, and we've hired more people to bring them on board. They're all working overtime right now to get these applications through. And, we do expect the first licenses to be issued here in the next few weeks. And, already we've had 24 pre-qualifications put through. And that's just step one. That's the investigative part, the part where we look into your background, your criminal background, your financial background. We make sure that you can afford to run these businesses so that there won't be temptation to take this product to the black market and those types of things. So consumers can be confident that when a person receives their license, they have been thoroughly vetted by the state, and that it's going to be a business that will run, hopefully within the law, and you won't have to worry about that. It's really for the safety of the patient is why we're taking so long.
You've had an immense challenge already. If the public votes to approve recreational marijuana, It sounds like there's going to be some job openings at LARA here. Is your mission going to become just that much bigger?
So I haven't read the entire ballot initiative. It's quite lengthy. I've read some of it, and I do know that it puts LARA in charge of the regulation of the recreational side, but it ties it to the medical side. And so there will be added work for the department. But we've already implemented and are regulating 2 separate laws. The 2008 law is still in place. That's the one where patients and caregivers can have their own marijuana in their own homes. You can get a registry card with the state. We have, just this morning I checked the numbers, there's 283,000 Michiganders with medical marijuana card holders. And there's 43,000 of the caregivers who are allowed to help the patients kind of with their marijuana. So we regulate that side already. We do the 2016 law, which is the Facilities Licensing Act. That's the one that's kind of in the news right now when we're handing out licenses to businesses. And so if the recreational passes, that would be a third law that would kind of be, they each are kind of running in their own lanes, and we would be the regulatory body for that one as well.
Earlier in May, the Michigan Medical Marijuana Review Panel recommended 10 disorders be added to the approved list that would justify treatment with medical marijuana. Pardon me, those include autism, Parkinson's disease, a number of others. How much harder will it be, how much bigger will LARA's job be if 10 more disorders were added to that list?
I don't know that it will be that much larger. We've already set up our staff to handle, we handle over 750 new card holders every day in the state of Michigan. I mean, think about that. Every business day, we are receiving and processing 750 new medical marijuana card holders. And so, there might be an uptick in that if these 10, medical conditions are approved by the director as becoming reasons why you can get a medical marijuana card. But, that decision is still a month or two off, for the director has to make that decision if those will be added as medical conditions, and if they are, we're ready to bring them into the fold and include them in our processes.
We'll return to the administrative dimension of this whole thing here and David's role and LARA's role here in just a minute. Let's get back to the debate over for and against legalization. Matt Yalscot, the ballot effort that was successful here, that will likely result in the November vote, was organized by a group called the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol. Some number of Michigan residents obviously equate alcohol consumption, which is obviously legal, with marijuana. Do they have it wrong?
The bottom line, making more drugs more accessible is not going to help. Alcohol, tax dollars, as I said earlier, I was a therapist for a few years at a treatment facility. And the tax dollars that come through, it's PA2 dollars, do not pay for treatment or prevention of alcohol already. They are 2 substances that are certainly addictive. Cannabis use disorder is in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that's written by doctors and professionals that sit down and say this is a use disorder. And it's been in there and it's going to stay in there because it's an addictive substance.
Well, anecdotally, I think most people believe that cannabis simply is not addictive in the same way that alcohol is. You're equating the two in terms of their addictive capacity?
I would say that they're both, the medical community equates them.
Is marijuana different than it used to be? I mean, is that anecdotal experience no longer valid?
I think that's absolutely measurable, that marijuana is different than what it used to be.
It's more potent and more addictive.
Absolutely.
That would be your case.
Mm-hmm. Marijuana extracts can be up to 90% THC, I believe. Something that you smoke out of a crack pipe on a superheated needle, dabs are not marijuana from the That 70s show that we're looking at. We're looking at a substance that is manufactured and highly synthetic.
On the Healthy and Productive Michigan website, your website, your organization refers to, quote, crack weed, unquote, and they quote a parent on the page This parent says, we have this high-potency crack weed everywhere now. I've been completely robbed of my son's teenage years because of this drug, unquote. Jeff Hank, I saw you shaking your head here a minute ago when Matthew was talking. How do you respond to accounts like that? And isn't that a reason for voters to consider voting against legalization?
No, it sounds like crack. I've been at this a long time, Mark. I've never heard the phrase crack weed. It sounds like something that was made up by political consultants. You said it earlier. Anecdotally, look, Americans are traveling. They go to California. They go to Colorado. They go skiing. They go to Denver. They go to Washington. They go to Seattle. They go to Oregon. They go to these places. They go to Nevada, and they see, you know what? The sky isn't falling. In fact, marijuana is not addictive. Marijuana is not physically addictive. It may be psychologically addictive for some people, and we certainly don't want to downplay addiction. If people have addictive tendencies or they have abuse issues, they should seek help, and that's important. And one of our things that our proposal will do is free up resources so that can happen. And we also free up police resources. One of the things that maybe David could tell you is that the people who pay for medical marijuana licenses are leading to the hiring of dozens of new police officers specifically to police marijuana conduct. So they're paying for new police officers. This doesn't come out of additional or existing taxpayer revenue. But that existing taxpayer revenue doesn't have to go to that as much now, so it's freed up to go to things like substance abuse, which is a real public health issue we want to take seriously. But the science doesn't play that out. And anecdotally, I think people know from experience and from traveling that marijuana is just not as harmful as people make it out to be. And times have changed. We know more now.
The medical applications aside, though, Jeff, smoking anything is not good for the lungs. Marijuana, like alcohol, kills millions of brain cells, which don't grow back, as I understand it. If you don't have a medical condition that you could argue is helped by cannabis, isn't there a pretty strong health case to be made against smoking pot for recreation?
Well, there's a lot of information out there, and in fact, there was a study that, and this goes, perhaps against prevailing wisdom, but that it was tested people who smoke tobacco, and people who don't smoke, and people who smoke cannabis, and then people who smoke cannabis and tobacco. The group that had the lowest incidence of lung cancer and other lung issues was actually just the sole cannabis consumers. So cannabis, in some instances, people believe it's cured their cancer. So we know there are medical purposes for it, and one of the problems with the laws that we have, and one of the things that we're going to change, is that you can do research on it. So we can actually learn these things, and instead of people like me or lawyers or people who are hired to work for political campaigns, we actually do the science and we actually learn, and where there are issues, we address them. But one of the other common misconceptions here is that as we begin to see new products develop, people aren't smoking marijuana as much. In fact, a large part of the market now is non-smokable marijuana. This is healthier marijuana. Maybe people eat it. Maybe they take it in a tea. Maybe they take a tincture or a candy. And a lot of these products that are being developed are the kind that don't contain high levels of THC, so they don't actually even get people high. So as the research continues into things like CBD and other cannabinoids, which the body creates, and these are called endocannabinoids, and they're even in women's breast milk, and babies drink it, and all that. What you have with marijuana is a plant-based cannabinoid system, and we're learning more and more about that. So I'm not here to say go out and smoke marijuana, and that's great for you, that's healthy. I don't make these claims that it cures everything, okay? You can go on the internet and you can read any of that stuff. But what we do make the claims are that the marijuana prohibition is worse. It's created more harm than marijuana itself, okay? There aren't people dying from marijuana. There aren't people addicted to marijuana. People are going to jail for marijuana. People are being arrested for marijuana. People are having their family lives disrupted for marijuana. People are having their assets seized over marijuana. None of that is good for people's health. So when you weigh all those things and you weigh the stress, you talk about a personal story. I'll tell you a story. I had a client who smoked marijuana his entire life. He was in his late 60s, and he got in trouble with the police. They visited his home because they searched his trash. And they came in for medical marijuana grow, and he had, 3 or 4 extra plants, little tiny plants like this, not anything too serious. This gentleman was put through the court process with felony charges, had smoked marijuana his entire life, all of a sudden had to stop, put him through so much stress, he died during the court process. And to this day, I believe, and his family believes, it was the stress of a marijuana prosecution that killed this man. It wasn't marijuana. So what people are noticing in the real world is that marijuana prohibition hasn't helped anybody. There may be issues with addiction or substance abuse, and those are real issues we ought to deal with too. But this is what this is about. It's about helping people, and it's about not harming people, and that's what our proposal does.
If you'd like to participate in tonight's live open line show on what's next for marijuana in Michigan, you can call in with your questions for our guests. Dial 517-349-1232 or participate through social media on Twitter and Facebook using our handle @HomeTV, HOMTV. Once again, we have Jeffrey Hank, Chair of the Board of Directors and Executive Director for Michigan Legalize. David Harns is Public Information Officer for the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, and Matthew Yalscot, Grassroots Director for Healthy and Productive Michigan, in studio with us tonight. You two in particular have both made all kinds of assertions about misinformation. Let me follow up with you, Matthew. What would you say, from your perspective, is the biggest piece of misinformation that's in play?
Well, misinformation, the first thing that comes to my mind is the billboards that are on the expressway right now. And reduction in youth use is the one that really resonates with me. You know, you talked earlier about the parent on our website who was saying, I lost my son's childhood due to this. We're looking at an industry that's blazing down the path that's already been blazed through by Big Tobacco. Big Tobacco saw that you need to market to youth to secure lifelong consumers, just like any other addictive industry. Alcohol makes most of their money from alcoholics, people that consume their product on a daily basis. This is an industry that is out to make money, and that's why they're trying to legalize in all these states right now. And we need to step back.
Doesn't that give you pause, Jeff, Hank? I mean, what about protecting really young kids from
according
this?
To the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, found in 2016 that the number of teens using marijuana and the number with problematic use, which is the more important number, is falling as more states legalize or decriminalize cannabis. The findings were based on a survey of more than 200,000 youth in all 50 states. Marijuana is already available to our youth, Mark, and this is the thing that the opposition doesn't understand. It's not going away. It's not a choice between just incarceration or legalizing. We're not adequately regulating things right now. What we've done is create a very sensible proposal which will allow resources to be focused on things like abuse or like child use. And as I said earlier, we studied every single state, and we studied what happened with tobacco and marketing to kids and put in our proposal that LARA can regulate advertising. It specifically has to prevent products and advertising that appeal to children, just like they used to do with tobacco. We're saying you can't do that in Michigan. So we've actually created the laws to prevent big marijuana from coming in and taking over. And that's what the opposition, they don't get. In fact, they may even be funded by big marijuana for all that we know, because it's typically big alcohol and big tobacco that want to take over big marijuana, and they use these political front groups. So when we talk about misinformation, I hear things like from Senator Arlen Meekoff, and he says, this proposal will disrupt everything, and it's bad, and blah, blah, blah. No, this proposal is based on bipartisan legislation, which was passed, which is the Michigan Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act, which is being very thoroughly implemented and regulated by LARA. Our proposal gives LARA the same ability to create those same rules. They're learning the lessons right now with medical. Basically, all the rules that we're developing with medical, which are very sensible and very thorough, are going to apply to adult use legalization as well. And the power exists within this initiative to address anything that comes up. So if an issue comes up with youth and marijuana use, then the rules can be created to control the industry to do so. We specifically created this to prevent big marijuana from coming in and being this boogeyman and creating a proposal. You heard David cite there's 40-some thousand caregivers in the state of Michigan. We expect 50,000 people to be employed in this industry. Those are jobs that are typically going to pay more than minimum wage. So when we start putting more tax money into everything from Social Security to health services to mental health and addiction services, roads, schools, bridges, and schools, we create a more just, more safe, more fair, more free society, and that's what America's all about.
The question I have to ask you on the heels of that is Healthy and Productive Michigan funded by big tobacco?
Absolutely not. You can look
I feel
at our
obligated
funding.
to ask you that.
You can look at our funding.
You think
It's
they're
available on
They're funded by
They're
funded by Project SAM. So out in Arizona, where marijuana legalized,
and you folks are funded also by a national out-of-state partner, the Marijuana Policy Project.
We have thousands of donors.
Coming.
You guys have a handful, and you got most of your money from Project SAM. So besides Project SAM, they're out in Arizona, Mark. What we saw is we actually saw opiate manufacturers like Insys giving money to defeat marijuana legalization. So the people that are putting products out there, we're talking about drug dealing, that are killing tens of thousands of Americans every single year, are actually putting up money to defeat marijuana legalization. That's because the science shows, and these people are smart enough to realize this, that where medical marijuana or legalized marijuana is available, people are abusing opioids less, so we're saving lives. So when we talk about kids dying, we're going to save a life if we legalize marijuana, because somebody somewhere is going to use marijuana and not get addicted to opiates and not have some sort of other substance abuse problem that's actually going to ruin their life. That's what the statistics typically bear out.
Matt, you make a powerful case against addiction as being kind of the umbrella issue here, but would you concede there might be something to what Jeff Hank is saying here?
Well,
better someone be enthusiastic about legal marijuana than be tempted by opioids.
You know, at the end of the day, like I said before, making more drugs more accessible isn't going to help anything. And youth use, let's just think logically for a minute. Increased availability is going to mean increased use. If something's more available to youth, their developing mind, their logical thinking hasn't fully developed until the age of 25. They're going to make those irrational decisions and use something that's more available.
Matthew, where'd you grow up? Did you grow up in Michigan?
Yeah, I grew up in Grosse Pointe.
Okay, was marijuana available to you in high school when you were in Grosse Pointe, Michigan?
Yeah, marijuana certainly.
It was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was before marijuana legalization. Okay, I grew up here locally in Holt. I lived in East Lansing. I'll tell you, marijuana was everywhere. It was available for us in junior high. It was available for us in high school. So it's already here. We're not talking about making it more available. We're talking about policing it and regulating it by not throwing people in jail and taking it out of the black market and the money away from criminal gangs and using it to fund things like roads, schools, bridges, and the things that people really want. So this is why we're going to win, Mark. And it'd be great if we could get the legislature to adopt this, but if they're going to adopt it and do things like tinker with tax revenue that people care about, we don't support that. The people we really want and really think we have a good proposal, and we think the public is with us on this. And all this, again, all the public opinion polling that's come out has shown that. And year by year, Bernie Porn Epic MRA has done a poll in Michigan, and it appears that we're going up 3 or 4% every year. So probably by the time the election hits, we're going to be nearing 70%. And so that's what's fascinating about this issue. There has been a real change in people's minds, and that's because I think they have better information. They don't believe some of these things that are coming out of the opposition's mouth.
But Jeffrey, it's irresponsible to make statements saying that youth use will decrease with legalization. That's just not going to happen.
I didn't say youth use. I didn't say youth. Hold on. I didn't say youth use would decrease with legalization. I cited a journal, a scientific journal, which said in Colorado, youth use did not increase, and it has not increased across the nation. And I don't believe that it will. If
but
you're a
isn't
youth, you
legalization it's permission? It's some kind of incentive, isn't it, Jeff?
I don't think so, Mark. And here's the other thing to remember. Marijuana was legal in this country for the majority of this country. In fact, the Declaration of Independence was written on hemp paper, was written on marijuana paper. It was not illegal in this country until the 1930s. And if you go back and you look at it, Henry Anslinger and what happened there, a lot of the impetus for marijuana laws was based on racism. It was based on Jim Crow policy. And you can flash forward to the Nixon era, where Nixon was quoted by his aides as saying we wanted to criminalize the blacks and we wanted to criminalize the anti-war left. So one way we do that is we could keep marijuana going. Back in the marijuana prohibition going. Back in the Nixon era, they did a study. Federal government did a study, and they were honest at that point, and they said, marijuana shouldn't be illegal. And here we are now, decades later, finally kind of getting sensible on this, and people are ready for it.
All right, I'm told we've got a tweet here that we can pass along to our guests here, and here we are at Home TV. Will the legalization of weed aid the hemp industry in becoming more mainstream? Who wants to tackle that?
Well, I'll tackle that because our proposal does allow for the farming of industrial hemp, and that's going to create jobs. And we're seeing products, Kentucky, until marijuana prohibition came about, was the largest producer of hemp in the world. Now we import our hemp from China and from Canada primarily. So hemp doesn't get people high. It can be made into food. It can be made into fiber. It can be made into textiles. It's used in home insulation. Henry Ford used it to make an automobile back in the day. This is fascinating Michigan history if you've seen this down at the Ford Museum. So our proposal allows for that. It would allow for the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development to regulate hemp farming, and that's a great thing for Michigan because we're going to be able to create those jobs here first before someone else creates them somewhere else.
Dave Harns, let's work you back in here. Dave Harns of LARA. Would a measure, we've been in a very interesting political moment just recently because just in the last few days leading up here to May 31st, it appears there was some desire on the part of the Republican majority in the legislature to actually legislate legal recreational marijuana it looks like that is probably not going to be the case now. Would a measure passed by the legislature be easier for any reason to administer than a ballot measure passed by the voters?
Not necessarily, and LARA is neutral on the recreational issue. Basically, what we say is that if the voters give us something to regulate, we'll regulate it. If they decide not to, then we'll continue on as is. We have, however, set up our systems in such a way that if the ballot measure passes, they are set up that it's not going to. We aren't going to have to reinvent the wheel in order to bring that on board. Right now we have a statewide monitoring system that's going to track the seed to sale of each marijuana plant in the state of Michigan. So what you have in the medical marijuana side here in Michigan, the law created it's a closed loop, if you will. The product has to be grown here, has to be sold here, has to be consumed here. And so inside the state of Michigan, we have a statewide tracking system that will also be able to put into it the recreational side if need be. So we've created, as we've gone through this process, we've set it up in such a way that if recreational ever comes our way, we'll be able to regulate it. But again, that's totally up to the voters. Whatever they choose to do is what we're going to regulate.
517-349-1232. If you have a question for any of our guests here tonight, we're talking about the future of marijuana here in Michigan. Matt Yalscot, the plan that some of the Republicans have put forth in the state legislature is called adopt and amend. In other words, pass a measure very much like the legalization measure that would be on the ballot proposal, but then, being the legislature, make whatever changes you want to make. Do you have any position on the political calculus of that approach?
Well, we don't support, obviously, the legislature preemptively legalizing this. Like I brought up that poll earlier, we're confident that we can swing this, that all we need is more education campaigns for Michiganders. We've seen the top line decrease more and more. Opposition to this campaign is building, and we're confident that we'll be able to stop this at the polls and the legislature doesn't have to move on this.
Your thoughts on adopt and amend here? It looks unlikely at this point, Jeff, but what do you think?
Yeah, so again, we have a very thoroughly drafted proposal. As David said, it's very long. It's about 7 times as long as the proposal we did back in 2015, 2016. So the things that the legislature is talking about amending are not things that are necessary. Again, they're trying to change the tax revenue. So instead of putting money into roads and schools, they want to give it to law enforcement or they want to lower the taxes. When we pulled this, and people in Michigan, they care about where they want their money to go. They want to go to roads and schools. So changing those kind of things, taking away civil liberties, making it so big business can take over, if those are the kinds of changes the legislature is thinking about, we don't want that. We don't think the people wants that. Now, they could adopt it and amend it and speed up implementation and pass it with immediate effect and legalize marijuana next week. And that would be a great thing if they did that and give the system some time to work, get LARA working on the rules. The other thing they could do is they could adopt and amend and include the expungement of past marijuana convictions so we can get people employed in these industries. And that's what we've seen happen in other states.
Is that likely here, though?
It's possible. In fact, Brian Calley and some of the Republicans have been supporting criminal justice reform and have talked about trying to end the prison pipeline. So, if one of the first interactions that people have with the police is a young kid, is a marijuana conviction, you don't want to start that trend with the criminal justice system. So I think we're kind of moving in a positive direction on this generally, Mark, and just about everybody's on the page that this is going to happen. It's not a question of, if, it's sort of a question of when and how it's going to look. So our position right now is if they would adopt it and not amend it negatively, then that'd be great because we should have had marijuana prohibition ended yesterday or 2 years ago or 5 years ago or a long time ago. It shouldn't continue on for another 6 months. But if they're going to amend it in a negative way that is against the public interest, it's better for us to go to the people and have a higher standard to protect that law so that the public interest is protected as well.
All right. I'm told we have a message on the Facebook page, which we'll take a look at here. From Sierra, what health benefits does marijuana have for people with already diagnosed diseases? We don't have a physician on the panel, Sierra, I'm sorry to say.
Well, the state of Michigan has recognized many conditions. There are many pending conditions right now that LARA can do. So, I mean, the viewers should probably take a look at what the Medical Marijuana Act covers right now and what those pending conditions are. But it's everything from chronic pain to, I believe covers PTSD now and other ailments that people found relief from.
So in 2008, the law that was passed by the voters had a set of conditions that you were allowed to get a medical marijuana card for. And over the years, there's a system set up where folks can bring petitions to the medical marijuana review panel that you mentioned earlier, and they can either include these petitions or these medical conditions in this law, which allows you to get this medical marijuana card, or they can decide not to. So at that review panel hearing that you mentioned, 10 conditions were not added, but they were recommended for adding. Some of the ones that have been added in the past, was the PTSD, and so we'll know here this summer if these other ones are added. But a panel of physicians recommended that they were at our meetings last month.
Matt Yalscot, I want to ask you, you quoted some stats in terms of support for and opposition to the legalization of marijuana. Go a little bit deeper with that. What were those numbers again? You actually had more opposed than in favor, correct?
It was more in favor. So we have 48% in favor, 42% opposed, and 11% were undecided. This was done through Victory Phones. This was a very reliable poll system with the last administration, something that was a big tipping point for Michigan. So we're pretty confident that this poll is very accurate and we can swing those undecided.
And characterize why people, why the people who oppose legalization, why do they oppose it? What do you know about the popular attitudes against legalization?
Well, I think they're seeing all the issues that are coming out of other states. I think they're afraid of bringing in another addictive industry that's just here for profit. They're not here to help our roads. They're not here to help our society. We have 6 people that are in prison right now for marijuana-related crimes in the state of Michigan. And as I said earlier, there is a better alternative to legalization and incarceration, this dichotomy that we're being presented with right now. And what we need to do as a state, as a nation, is focus on awareness campaigns, focus on education, put money into prevention, put money into educating kids in health programs in schools.
The numbers here, we had a survey that came out of Michigan State here just in the past week showing 61%, this is the number I quoted a minute ago, 61% of state residents favor legalizing weed for recreation, 3 out of 5. But the numbers changed substantially according to age. 80% of people under 30 favor legalization, but only 30% of residents 65 or older favor legalization, and it's somewhere in between for that age group in between. Jeff Hank, if it came to a November vote then, which you probably assume it will, how important is it that a lot of young people turn out?
This is the fascinating question. That's the big thing everybody's wondering, and that's where you get a lot of this political intrigue of Republicans in the legislature trying to adopt now to try to prevent what they perceive to be Democratic turnout in November, possibly as a result of this. But I don't think it's a big deal, Mark. With the polling, it all depends on how you ask the question. I've seen probably a dozen polls, and as a campaign, we've done what you would call more like a focus group type polling. So when you actually explain the proposal to people, when you actually tell them what it's going to do, and you actually have a chance to learn the facts about it, I think we're looking at above 70% approval. And yes, there are demographic differences, but our internal polling that we looked at, there was only one demographic, and that was a very narrow one, that was below the 50% line. And that was over a year ago, so I assume that's changed 3 or 4% up by now. So the most the polls show above 60%, and when you're in a ballot committee, that's a very strong place to be. And we're climbing towards 70% right now. So,
Dave Harns, I've read that there are 5 different kinds of licenses that LARA is granting right now. We get growers, processors, testers, transporters, and dispensaries. Can you take just a second or two and talk about each one of those? Some of them are pretty self-explanatory, but others aren't.
Yeah, and the law set it up this way so that that there was different people doing different parts of the businesses, and and those who test can't be involved in the growing or the selling. Those who transport can't be involved in the testing or the growing or the selling. So it's set up in such a way that the licenses are separate. You can grow, you can process, and you can sell, but the other ones are kind of on their own. So basically, if you take a marijuana plant from the very beginning, it starts out with one of the growers, and the grower licenses are set up as A, B, and C. A is 500 plants, up to 500 plants. B is up to 1,000, and C is up to 1,500 plants. So you can get one of those different types of licenses if you have the wherewithal to do that. And once you grow the marijuana, it can go into the processor license. And the processor is the one who does the stuff with the marijuana. They create the sellable product. And so you have to be licensed to do that as well. And there's testing points, multiple testing points throughout this process. Once it's grown, once it's processed, it has to go to the safety compliance facility and then come back. And the only people that can take it to and from those places are the secure transporter, and that's its own license. So when all of that is done and the product is tested and it's sealed and it's safe by the state of Michigan standards, then it's sold wholesale to the provisioning centers, which is the only place that you can buy your medical marijuana. They will check your ID and they'll check your medical marijuana card before they sell you this. Make sure that you are not over your daily limit or what have you, and it'll be tracked throughout the system to make sure that there's no room for abuse there. That's going to help the state keep an eye on these businesses to make sure that they're following the laws. When we do the inspections, we'll make sure that they're all in compliance with the rules and all of that too.
Well, the reporting that I've read about in the aftermath of the medical marijuana, the ballot approval, focused on the fact that measure simply wasn't comprehensive enough or detailed enough. An awful lot of confusion resulted from the passage of the medical marijuana. It's taken us years to sort out this landscape, and we're still not entirely there. I'm hearing an awful lot more detail this time around. Are we going about the legalization of recreational marijuana better than we went around about the ballot measure of medical marijuana?
It's not really for me at LARA to say. I will say that there was a lot of confusion that came out of the 08 law, and that's why the 16 law was put into place to help clear up some of that confusion. Mm-hmm. Just a quick cursory read of the ballot language here. It is much more in depth than the 08 law was. It does follow a lot of the procedures and things that are already in place. So it is implementable. I don't really want to speak on behalf of LARA if this is a good way about it or not. Again, if the voters decide that that's something that they want done, then we'll do it.
Matt Yalscot, local communities all over Michigan have been, one by one, legalizing possession of marijuana, small adults, or small amounts at least, over the years. I take it you view this trend pretty negatively.
Well, I think decriminalization is one thing, and that may be an alternative that is possible, but legalization, full-blown legalization, is something that will be detrimental to the state of Michigan. We analyzed and we talked a little bit about what's going on with the municipalities and the ballot language. I'd like to touch on the fact that there is no opt-in to the current language with this. There's only opt-out. So my municipality, where I live, if this passes, recreational marijuana will be allowed. We won't have a chance to opt into this. So unlike other proposals in other states where they could have opted in, it would just come. It's coming to your communities.
So municipalities would have to take action to opt out of the law.
That's right. They'd have to hold a special election the following year to opt out.
But there's still an awful...
That's not true.
You dispute that?
Yeah, that's not true. They have to opt out, but that can be done by city council or by resolution. It doesn't require a special election.
Any follow-up to that, Matthew?
What I believe and the facts that I have is that it requires a special election. I'd like to look into that a little bit further.
Yeah, it's not the case.
Jeff Hank, what's your understanding? I mean, Matthew brought up this point, which often has confused me in the past: legalization versus decriminalization. Is that Is that a point we need to explore here?
You know, a lot of times those terms are used interchangeably.
Yeah.
For some people, if you want to be technical, decriminalization could include no criminal penalties on marijuana, but not necessarily having a regulatory structure for commerce in place. So you could essentially legalize marijuana for adults, but you don't have a regulatory structure. But what we've seen here in Michigan is that we have hundreds of thousands of people in the commercial market right now for medical marijuana. You have to have commercial regulations to deal with marijuana. In fact, that's how you keep it from getting into kids. That's how you make the product safe. So we drafted this proposal to be seamless with the medical marijuana. It doesn't touch it, doesn't interfere with it, doesn't affect it, but to seamlessly operate with the state. So the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act passed in 2016. You could take that system, you could change a couple words in the law, just change it from medical to adult. We use the term adult use rather than recreational. That's what we like to say at the campaign. And you have legalized marijuana in Michigan. So, I mean, just a minor tweak in language, and we have a system that already works and that could be ready to solve this problem, you know, practically tomorrow, by Tuesday possibly even.
David Harns, how does LARA help us understand what LARA does at the state level? How does that connect with what communities do?
So right now with the MMFLA, which is the 2016 law, that was passed and it allowed communities to opt in. If communities don't do anything with the medical marijuana, then they are opting out. Like, that's the default state. So right now, as of today, we've had 96 municipalities throughout the state opt in. That's cities and villages and townships throughout the state. 96 of them spread throughout the Lower Peninsula and the Upper Peninsula have sent us their ordinance and said, here is how we are handling this in our community. Some of them are saying, we don't want provisioning centers in our area. We don't want the grows in our area, but we're okay with the safety facilities or the transporters or the processors or vice versa. Some of them say, you know, bring on the provisioning centers into our community. We want the jobs to come with that or what have you. So it's up to the locals to decide at what level they want to participate in the MMFLA. And so when they give us their ordinance, you know, you need to have local approval before you can get state approval. So one of the steps in the licensing process is that you show us that you have local approval before we'll give you a state license.
Okay. And there's huge sums of money attached to this new landscape. Good thing, bad thing? How is the millions of dollars that is ultimately going to change hands over this going to impact the state? Any thoughts on that, Matt?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to touch on employment. I know you guys have brought it up a lot, but our unemployment rate in Michigan hovers around 4.5% right now. There's a high demand for entry-level and for skilled trade jobs, jobs that require drug testing to pass, jobs where we've seen it in Colorado. There was a case, Brandon Coates versus Dish Network, that went all the way up to Colorado Supreme Court, said federal law surpasses state law. His termination was just. My community in Livonia, Amazon just came in and hired a bunch of people in our communities to come and work. Our big business is going to want to come to the state of Michigan where there are going to be issues like drug screening, like workplace incidences, issues like employee retention. I think that's a concern that a lot of us need to look at.
Just about out of time. Make it quick,
Big business is in Denver. They're in California. They're in Seattle. That's where Amazon, I believe, is even headquartered. They're not going to not come to Michigan. Our proposal allows employers to continue to drug test. So a lot of those concerns are, again, just way overblown political opposition.
I'd like to direct everyone to look at the Michigan Chamber of Commerce's stance against recreational marijuana as well.
Very good. We'll wrap on that note. That's all the time that we have in our 1-hour program involving what's next for marijuana here in Michigan. We want to thank you for watching at home and for the questions we received. We also want to thank our guests one more time for being here tonight. This program will replay on home TV, Comcast Channel 21 in Hazlet, Okemos, and East Lansing, and will be available on demand at hometv.net. I'm Mark Bayshore. Thank you for watching.